And we are good to go. So again, I am welcoming you to this space, wanting to give us a little bit of time to just settle into our bodies, into this space, and feel as present as possible. Present, not perfect, but present would be great. I'm Rebecca Lichtenstein. I go by Reba, and I'm here to work with you all tonight on a course called Literacy for Liberation. So again, just what's on the screen here, settling in, taking some deep breaths. I don't know about you, but my shoulders, my wrists, everything needs a little stretch. Before we jump into the work tonight or the class, I wanted to hear how you all are doing. If you're welcome to, if you're willing to share, you're welcome to share, and I hope you're willing. So showing this color diagram picture on the screen, I wanted to know what color reflects your mood right now. So if you can drop one in the chat or feel free to come off mute. And you can shout it out if you're comfortable or put it in the chat. I will kick us off and say that I feel sea foam, like a light green. I just moved into a new place. I just put up my plants, and sea foam is one of the colors I'm decorating with, and it's like a nice, peaceful, but bright color. And that's how I feel right now. I feel calm and peaceful, but also good and bright. So drop a color in the chat if you see one that resonates with you, and explain why if you want to. I'll give us a minute here if you have any colors that are speaking to you. All right, we got an ivory for some calm vibes. Yes, love a soft white. That's a great color for my decorating here too. Love it. Any other colors, any other feelings? And again, I do invite you to come off mute, but also totally fine if you want to just drop anything in the chat as well. All right, light taupe. Why do I not know how to say that word? Taupe. All right, so everyone's feeling kind of neutral and chill and calm. I love that coming into the weekend. There's a lot of snow outside, so we're feeling soft whites and tans. That feels right to me. And if any other colors come up for you as we talk about real reading tonight, drop them in the chat or feel free to shout them out. Dark red, my favorite color, matches my sweater. All right, awesome. Thanks for sharing. So today, and I'm ready to jump into the content if you all are, today we are going to learn how to read. And you might be thinking, I already know how to read. And you do. But there's something you should know. A lot of people think that they're reading, but really they're fake reading. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. But again, you might think you know how to read, but you're probably fake reading. Watch me fake read this passage. I'm going to show you what I mean when I say fake reading. Black women paved the way for Kamala Harris. Annie Lee Cooper is one extraordinary Black woman whose name is often left out of history books. Black Americans had long been stopped from voting in the South, but Cooper was persistent. Cooper said, "I've tried to register several times, even before Dr. Martin Luther King came. They rejected me once and told me I failed the registration test. The other times they never let me in the place. Once I stood in line from 7 a.m. to 4 p.m., but never got in to register." So you might hear me reading and you might think I'm reading, but that is fake reading. And this is a quick plug for Newsela, which is where I think it's News ELA. I've heard people say Newsela. That's where I got this text. Really great resource for lots of articles about what's going on in the world or all different topics. And you can read them at all different reading levels. So that's my quick plug for that. Now, watch me real read it. The same two paragraphs, I'm going to real read it. And I want you to think about, as I'm real reading, what you think the differences are between what I just did and what I'm about to do now. So the first thing I just did was fake reading. Now I'm going to real read, and I want you to think about what are the differences. Black woman paved the way for Kamala Harris. Okay, Kamala Harris just became vice president, and this was written in February of 2021, so a recent article. And I'm seeing some women here. Let's see, what is this picture represent? Annie Devine, Fannie Lou Hamer, and Victoria Gray were activists in the civil rights movement for Mississippi. I know what the civil rights movement is. And the women stand outside the US Capitol building after being denied entry on January 4th, 1965. So this is from the 60s, and they were not allowed in. They were denied entry. Okay, that's what this picture is showing. Let's see what the text says. Annie Lee Cooper is one extraordinary Black woman whose name is often left out of history books. That's true. Black Americans had long been stopped from voting in the South, but Cooper was persistent. What does persistent mean? I think persevere, persistent means like not giving up. So Black women often not allowed to vote or stopped from voting, but Cooper didn't give up. Cooper said, I've tried to register several times, so several times she didn't give up, even before Dr. Martin Luther King came. They rejected me once and told me I failed the registration test. The other times, they never let me in the place. Once I stood in line from 7 a.m. to 4 p.m., but never got in to register. That's all day. So this person stayed in line, Annie Lee Cooper, all day and never got in. So I just fake read that first passage or the first time and real read the second time. What's the difference between the fake reading and the real reading? Is there anything you noticed? And feel free to come off mute or drop in the chat anything you noticed between the first time I read it and the second time I read it. And I'll give us a minute here. Again, in the chat or feel free to come off mute. Anything different between the first time I read it and the second time I read it?
I would say that the first time you read it, you just read it through, like the whole passage, where the second time you took your time and kind of also stopped to analyze specific words or to take in like more information.
Exactly. Thanks, Ashley. Right. The first time I just read it through, didn't pause, didn't take a beat. And the second time I was kind of like talking to myself, taking pauses, thinking about other information. Totally. Any other thoughts about the first time versus second time? And remember, you can use the chat too if you don't want to come off mute. Thanks, Ashley, for sharing that. All right, so I'll say real reading, and I said we think we're reading a lot of the time, and sometimes we're not, we're fake reading, because real reading is more than just reading words. Real reading is thinking. Real reading is asking questions, making connections, forming opinions, and so much more thinking, thinking, thinking. So really using your brain, thinking while you are reading, not just seeing the words on the page and repeating them. So let's practice real reading together. As I read this passage, and these are paragraphs from the same text that we started on the last slide, I'll stop every few sentences and we will think out loud. So in 1965, Cooper waited to register to vote at the courthouse in Selma, Alabama. Local police arrived at the courthouse to break up the line. The sheriff and Cooper got into a fight that turned physical. The sheriff hit Cooper and she hit him back, knocking the man to the ground. So I'm thinking 1965, we know that that's the civil rights movement. We were just seeing that picture on the last slide. Any other reactions, any other thoughts, anything stand out in this paragraph? What are we thinking as we're reading this? You can use the chat or come off mute. I'm thinking that this woman and a police officer got into a physical altercation, a fight. That doesn't sound so good. So definitely some thoughts here about Ms. Cooper, who's trying to get the right to vote, having to really struggle. And I'll keep reading. And again, if you come off mute, if you read in the chat, show us what you're thinking while you're reading so that we're real reading together. In November 2020, Kamala Harris was the first Black and South Asian woman elected as Vice President of the United States. In her acceptance speech, Vice President Harris acknowledged the women who came before her. Harris said, "They fought and sacrificed so much for equality and liberty and justice for all, including Black women who are often overlooked, but often prove that they are the backbone of our democracy. I stand on their shoulders." Scholars and historians agree that Harris is standing on the shoulders of many lesser known figures. So my first thought here is that Ms. Cooper is one of those figures, right? One of the women that came before Kamala Harris. Any other thoughts, any words we don't know, any connections to what's happening in the world today that you want to make? So again, real reading is thinking while we read, and I'm wondering if anyone has any thoughts. You can drop them in the chat or come off mute. And we had 2 more people join us, so I'm actually going to, and let's see if I can go back. I'm just coming back here to re-ground us in what we're doing here today. We are talking about the difference between fake reading and real reading is thinking while we read. And I'm going to give some tips and tricks today about how to real read, how to make sure you are really reading what's on the page and not just repeating the words. And also for the folks that joined us, I am recording this. I am pinning myself my video so that I think I'm the only one that can be seen. But let me know if you have any issue with that, but wanted to record this for people that weren't able to make it tonight for the Liberation Schools page. So feel free in the chat. You can chat me privately or chat to the whole group. All right, so coming back here, so real reading again, thinking about Kamala Harris, what's being said here, that she is standing on the shoulders of Black women who have come before her, who have fought for equality, and I'm connecting this to the Miss Cooper story and anecdote, how she was fighting for the right to vote and making some connections, thinking of words here that stand out to me: liberty, justice, and calling that Black woman the backbone of our democracy. That's something that stands out to me. All right, now you try it. So I'm gonna pause for a second. I'm not gonna read this part out loud. I'm gonna give us about 3 minutes, and I want you to read this passage to yourself and think, or jot if you have a pen and paper, if you want to write in the chat, if you have a sticky note on your computer, jot down what you think while you read. And actually what I'll do is I will read it out loud and I'll ask you to think while I read and jot or write stuff down. "So many Black women have laid the groundwork for this moment," said Judith Brown Dianis. I hope I'm saying that right. Dianis is the executive director of Advancement Project, a civil rights organization. "Because they did kick down the doors and they laid the groundwork, they were the ones who were the architects of the voting rights movement. Black women played critical roles in organizing, strategizing, and putting their lives on the line for political freedom. Even during the enslavement of Black people, Black women planned resistance movements and organized for freedom." Harris was sworn in as vice president more than 170 years after abolitionist Sojourner Truth traveled the country. Truth, who had been born with slave status, preached against slavery. She also advocated for women's rights, even when white women activists did not support the anti-slavery movement. So I just read that. I didn't think out loud while I was reading because I wanted you all to try it. So any thoughts or things that you wrote down, any reactions to this, any connections you're making, drop them in the chat or come off mute and share out. But how are you showing that? How can you show me and the other folks here that you are real reading this, or that we are we are real reading this together? All right, one thing I'm thinking is the word abolitionist, to abolish. means to end something. So I know abolitionists were people that were trying to end slavery. So Sojourner Truth is a famous one that we may have heard of before. And thinking about how women like Miss Cooper, who's mentioned at the top, and Sojourner Truth, they helped pave the way. They helped create space for Kamala Harris to be the vice president today. And just kind of making connections between what I'm reading here and what I know that's happening in the world right now, because I'm thinking while I'm reading. So my mind is activated and things are going off, and I'm really making connections here and thinking about what else I know as I read this article. And then I see the word architects, and I know that an architect is somebody that builds buildings. So saying that, or designs and creates and builds. So calling certain people the architects of the voting rights movement means they were really the creators of it. So again, real reading, thinking while we read. All right. Could you just describe what we just read about to someone else? So if I were to say, what did we just read? Give me a thumbs up in the with the Zoom reactions, write in the chat, yes or no. Do you feel like you could just describe what we read to someone else? If someone were to say, what did you just read? And I'll invite you again, come off mute, give me a thumbs up, write in the chat. All right, I'm seeing a thumbs up from Selena. So yes, right, we could say, I just read about the history of Black women in America and how they paved the way, how they created space for Kamala Harris to be vice president. And there are some examples in here, and they talked about, the time of slavery to the civil rights movement up until now. So I saw a hand raise. Was that a question or a accidental hand raise? Maybe a thumbs up. And again, feel free to use the chat whenever. So yes, we can describe what we just read because we're thinking while we're reading. We're real reading. Yes, you could. And that's because we're really reading and y'all rock. All right, so some more tips and tricks. And can someone remind me in the chat or come off mute, what does it mean to really read? What do I mean when I say real reading? Do I mean just repeating the words on the page?
It actually means to think when you're reading.
That's exactly right. Thank you, Selena. Am I saying that right, Selena?
Yes.
Awesome. All right. Yes. Thinking while you're reading, right? Like not just saying the words that are on the page, but using our brain, thinking, processing while we're reading. And we're going to learn a few more tips and tricks of how to do that. Thank you. All right. So another way to think while you read, to really read, is to leave tracks. So now we'll keep practicing real reading, but I want to show you something else that real readers do with a pencil, or now as we're on the computer, a lot of computer mouse, while they are reading. It's called leaving tracks. Just like animals, tracks say, hey, this is where I've been. A reader's tracks say, hey, I read this and here's what I think. So these are animal tracks, right? We've seen sometimes, even right now in the snow, people are walking outside, we see where they've been. You should be able to look at the page when you read something, and we should know that you've been there. Because real reading, like Selena said, is thinking while you read. So here are some examples. So on the left, we have the symbols or the codes or the tracks, and on the right, what they mean. So if you see something in the text that's shocking, you can write a little exclamation point. And I know, again, I mean, when I say write, we could do it on paper or on the computer. We have all of these tools where we can highlight things and annotate on the different platforms, on Microsoft Word, on the internet, whatever it is. So leaving tracks, we're using maybe emojis, smiley face, frowny faces to show how we feel about something. Maybe a question mark or I'm confused here, a star for something that's so interesting, a little light bulb when you learn something new, or little questions, why or how, when you have a question. And these are just some examples, whatever symbols work for you, but showing, marking up the text, we call it annotating as we read. So I'm going to practice, and this is still the same article from the top. Ida B. Wells was a Black female pioneer for civil rights. I'm circling the word pioneer because I just want to think about that for a second. So a pioneer, I think pioneers, someone that's pioneering something is like on the forefront of it. So like a leader. So Ida B. Wells was a Black female pioneer or leader for civil rights. Wells was born with slave status in 1862 near Holly Springs, Mississippi. As an adult, Wells became an author, newspaper owner, and advocate against lynching. And I'm thinking, wow, those are some cool jobs, being an author, a newspaper owner, and an advocate. That's a lot of stuff. And that makes me happy that she was able to do that in 1862, be a newspaper owner. In 1913, Wells created a suffrage group focused on securing the right to vote for Black women. Circling suffrage, and suffrage describes what that is in the text. Suffrage is the right to vote. So she's creating a suffrage group. So I'm thinking, okay, Ida B. Wells is awesome. She was born a slave and then became an author, newspaper owner, and was fighting for Black women's right to vote. Like, she's doing a lot of work, and I'm sure this is another woman that where the article is describing helped Kamala Harris get where she is today. The white women's suffrage movement excluded Black women. Angry face. I'm jotting in the text, angry face, like they're all fighting for the woman's right to vote, but white women are excluding Black women, which we don't agree with. For example, white suffragists organized a parade in Washington on March 3rd, 1913, but they wanted the parade segregated by race. So all these women want the right to vote, and they're segregated by race, and we're not feeling great about that. However, Wells had no intention, so she had no plan. She was not willing to marching in the back of the parade, and instead joined the front. So she's like, nope, I'm part of this too. I'm going to march in the front. I am not taking this stand because I personally wish for recognition, she wrote later. I am doing it for the future benefit of my whole race. And I'm giving her some clap emojis here because she's not doing this to be like, I'm Ida B. Wells and I'm awesome, even though she is awesome based on what we're reading here, but she's doing it because she wants all Black people to have the right to vote, Black women. And these are some tracks that I'm leaving. So I'm thinking while I'm reading, you hear me talking to myself. And this is something, I'm sitting alone now, so I talk out loud. Maybe I do it in my head, but thinking while I'm reading, thinking about the connections that I know to other things in the article that I've read, to other things in history that I've read, and marking up the text, showing what I'm thinking as I'm reading. So here are some tracks. All right, your turn. So again, and I know you all don't have this in front of you, I could drop the text in the chat if that's helpful. Do a little copy and paste situation in case you want to mark it up on your end. So again, we're going to leave some tracks. So I want you to try it, and I know you don't have this printed out, so you can track some stuff on the computer, write down what you would put, and I'll read this part out loud for us too. Mississippi Challenge, and this is another part of the same article. Ella Baker is often called a social architect of the civil rights movement in the mid-20th century. Social architect. So again, somebody that builds something, social being like how we interact. So an architect, somebody that was a leader or builder in this movement. Martin Luther King Jr. recruited her to help run and organize the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. She then helped form the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, which they called SNCC. This group organized freedom rides to challenge segregated transportation between states, segregated meaning separate by race. So I'm thinking while I'm reading, I'm making connections to and defining the words, and I want you on your screen, and I can't track while I'm sharing my PowerPoint, so you're doing the tracking for us now. Ella Baker and Fannie Lou Hamer were two co-founders of the Mississippi Democratic Freedom Party. In 1964, Mississippi's Democratic Party sent only white delegates to the Democratic National Convention. The Mississippi Democratic Freedom Party was formed in response to this. So these two women that are the co-founders of the Mississippi Democratic Freedom Party in response to only white people being sent to the Democratic National Convention. So any tracks you left, and you can drop in the chat or come off mute, anything that you would mark up here, any words you circled, any smiley faces or frowny faces or exclamation points, or any tracks you would leave here. I'll give us a minute, maybe come off mute, write them in the chat, let us know how you would track this text or mark up this text.
I will put an exclamation point and like a smiley face.
All over or in a certain spot?
In a certain spot.
All right, which spot?
So, you know the text that you put in chat?
Mm-hmm.
So I'll put an exclamation point near like Ellie Baker is often called a social artist. I can't really say the word
Architect.
architect. I'll put that because that seems really cool to me.
Totally. All right, awesome. Yeah, and Selena is saying, I put it in the chat, it's the same text that's on the screen. So Ella Baker is often called a social architect, and you would put an exclamation point because that's cool, that's exciting. We're saying, wow, that was something that she was. Awesome. And you said a smiley face before?
Wait, no, yeah, so you know the other text?
Yeah.
So I was thinking about putting a, you know where you put the, so I was thinking about putting like so I have this tiny notebook with me, and I'm writing down like the exclamation point and like the emoji and the other two.
Mm-hmm. You want me to go back to the tracks?
Yeah. And oh wait, there's 4. Wait, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh, there's 6. So I was writing down this and that,
Mm-hmm.
and I kind of get confused in like books, which I read, and I have a book which is like connected to like Black Panther because it's about Black Panther's sister. I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I kind of, so my mom said I'm actually supposed to be reading 2 or 1. So I finished the first chapter, which was about a mission, and now on the and I'm the second part, which is actually the mission.
And you get confused sometimes?
Yeah, I get confused sometimes with the words that I read.
Yeah. So one way that I don't know if you saw, and I can come back to this, Selena, if you want to write down the tracks. And again, these are just some examples, but anything that helps mark up the text. But you saw here at the beginning when there was this word that I didn't know or I wanted to think about, I circled it. And
Oh.
I circle words, and we'll talk about this a little bit more. But a really good tip or a really good way to figure out some words we don't know is to first of all circle them, right? Like make sure, okay, I saw a word, I read it, I don't really know what it means. Like before when you were trying to pronounce architect, maybe you'd circle that. And instead of just moving on, right, we need to stop and think while we read so that we're making sure we understand it. And if we don't know the word, we probably don't understand it, right? We got to figure it out. So I do 2 things. One is I try to use context clues, right? Like what is it saying here? What is this story about, and what makes sense here. And then I try to think of a word that might make sense, that might be a synonym or another word that means the same thing. And I plug it in instead of the word that I circled to see if that makes sense. So for example here, Ida B. Wells was a Black female pioneer for civil rights. Wells was born with slave status in 1862. As an adult, she became an author, and we were reading this, and we're learning here in these paragraphs that she was a leader, that she created a group, and that she led at this parade. So I'm thinking, okay, if she was a pioneer, maybe she was like a leader or a creator. And I'm going to plug in that word and see if that makes sense here. So if I change it and I read Ida B. Wells was a Black female leader for civil rights. Does that make sense? Was she a leader for civil rights? And the rest of this tells me yes. So maybe pioneer means leader or something like it. You see what I did there? I plugged in what I thought might be a synonym for this word and then saw if it like kept the meaning of the sentence and the paragraph the same. Instead of just moving on and thinking, oh, I don't know what that word means, but that's okay.
I understand now.
Okay, and we'll keep practicing that, but definitely really good to, awesome Selena, to acknowledge and to, name when you don't know a word, because real readers are thinking while they read, and if you weren't thinking, you would just read the word on the page and not process. But when we think, okay, I don't know what this word means, I got to figure it out, that shows that we're really reading. So that's awesome. And I always circle words I don't know, and I always try to figure them out, because if I don't know a word, I probably don't know what the sentence is saying. And if I don't know what the sentence is saying, I might not know what this paragraph is saying. So we got to figure out what words mean. So that's awesome. Thanks for sharing. So I'm going to bring us back to where we were just on your turn. Any other folks, before we move on, any other tracks you left, any other thoughts while you were reading here, any ways you want to show either in the chat or out loud how you were real reading this part of the story? All right, I'm going to keep us moving. So what tracks did you leave in where? So Selena was asking us some questions, telling us that she would leave an exclamation point, and I said she. I don't know your pronouns, Selena. I'll say Selena. Tell me if they're different. So what tracks we're leaving and where? And again, you can tell us in the chat or come off mute to describe them. Sad face for the second last sentence. So in 1964, Mississippi's Democratic Party sent only white delegates to the Democratic National Convention. Right, a sad face. I read this and I'm like, that's not good. So I'm going to mark a little something, a sad face, a frowny face. And what's really good about marking up the text is then I know in school you might get asked questions, to write an essay response or to answer questions based on a text. And if you have these little tracks everywhere, you can remember what you read and where you read it and go back to the text to use it. So yeah, frowny face for that. Thanks for sharing, Christopher. Yeah, so we want to, if we're reacting to something, if it's making us feel something, that means we're thinking while we're reading, and we want to jot it down, write it down so we can come back to it. Awesome. Any other tracks we left? Any other thoughts while we were reading? Give us another minute and then we'll keep on with our tips and tricks. All right, awesome work, y'all. Okay, so another thing that real readers do, we said they think while they read, they leave tracks while they read, and the third thing I want us to talk about is checking for understanding, or CFUs. We call them CFUs. So this is when you read a little bit and you stop and ask yourself, okay, what was that part about? And then tell what that part was about in your own words, right? So you should be able, when you read something, and I said this at the beginning, if someone asks you, what did you just read? And you can't describe it or you can't talk about it in your own words, then you probably weren't totally understanding or processing or thinking about it as you're reading. And that is fake reading. That's not real reading. So for real reading, we're able to stop and say, okay, what did I just read about? And answer that question. Expert readers, that's you all, that's what we're working towards, being expert readers, check for understanding so they can make sure they get what they're reading. If you don't quite understand that part, or if they don't quite understand that part, they'll want to use strategies to check their understanding before they go on. So we should never keep going if we don't understand something. We got to like back up and reread. Selena, I see you're raising your hand. Do you have a question?
So my question is, what do real readers do that fake readers don't?
Awesome question. So, and I'll see if anyone else wants to answer that before I do. I don't know if Christopher or Xiomara or Solomon, anything we've picked up so far that real readers do that fake readers don't, and you can put it in the chat or come off mute. Do you think you know, Selena? What's one thing that we talked about doing so far?
Thinking.
Right, so fake readers don't think while they read, they just read what's on the page. So you could see a whole bunch of words and you could repeat them, and then you'd be like, oh, I read that, but did you really read it? Nope, you fake read it. So you're right, they think while they read. What else do they do?
So if they don't understand real readers, fake readers don't think. I was gonna see how there's another point. What I was gonna say one day. So when fake readers don't think, they just like they don't get connected to like the story, and real readers get connected to the story, and if they don't understand a word, they try to figure it out. That's what real readers do, and fake readers don't do.
Exactly. Perfect way to describe it. Fake readers don't think while they read. Real readers make connections, they ask questions, they have opinions, they think, and they try to figure out words they don't understand, and they leave tracks. We were just talking about that. And now we're going to talk about that they also, it's a lot of stuff. You got to be doing a lot of stuff to be a real reader. They also check for understanding, or CFU. So awesome, Selena, you're getting it. Real readers do all those things. Here's another thing. So they check for understanding. So the cool thing is that reading is not the only situation in which you need to check for understanding. Many professionals need to check for understanding in order to do their job well. So let's think of a few and decide what might happen if they don't check for understanding. And I put the first one here, a doctor, right? So if someone comes in sick and they say, I feel super nauseous and I have a fever, and the doctor, doesn't make sure that they understand what the patient is saying, they might treat them for the wrong thing, or they might not actually help them feel better or get better if they're not actually like understanding what the person is saying. Can anyone here, and you can drop in the chat or come off mute, think of another job where you would need to check for understanding? You would need to make sure that you understand what's happening before you move on or before you make a decision. When else do we need to check for understanding? A teacher, totally. I can can say yes, right? Like I need to understand what a student is trying to say. I need to ask questions, and I need to understand what I'm teaching, and make sure I'm checking myself. A builder, right? Somebody that's building a building needs to check that they understand the measurements and the materials, because they need the building to be safe. If they don't build it the right way, it could collapse and people could get hurt, right? Builders need to check for understanding. Awesome. Thanks, y'all. Got Christopher and Selena in the chat writing teacher, builder, lots of jobs, right? Somebody that flies an airplane, they got to check that everything's right and that they understand the whole situation. A pilot, lots of jobs. Keep them coming. If you think of more professions, more jobs where you need to check for understanding, drop them in the chat. And what I'm trying to explain to you all is that readers, which is everybody, needs to check for understanding. Cooks, right? Need to understand a recipe. Police, amazing. Yes. Salesman, yes, exactly. Everyone needs to check for understanding. Police is a really good one. Cook is a really good one. I'm thinking cook, right? If they don't understand the recipe, it could be really bad. A police person, if they don't check for understanding in the situation, somebody could get hurt. They got to make sure they know what's going on. So, and we've seen that happen, unfortunately, many times, too many times. So always checking for understanding in your job and in your reading. And I think about reading, you know, lawyers, they got to make sure they understand what they're reading. Everyone has to check for understanding. So the check for understanding, or the CFU process, goes like this. You read a little, you read a paragraph, you read a couple sentences, you stop, you ask yourself, what was that part about? And then you tell yourself in your own words what that part was about. So you should be able to cover up the thing that you just read and say to yourself, I just read blah, blah, blah. So I've read so far about Ida B. Wells and the, you know, and I can, without covering this to show if I were to cover my paper, but I could repeat back some of what I just read about to show that I understood what I was reading. So I'm not looking at the text right now. I don't have it in front of me. And I know that so far I have read about Black women in American history who have paved the way for Kamala Harris to now be vice president through slavery up until the civil rights movement, by fighting for the right to vote for people of color, and so on and so forth. I understood what I was reading. I read about the leaders, the pioneers of the civil rights movement that were Black women. So I'm checking for understanding by making sure I can repeat back what I read. What was that part about? So we're going to practice. And I'm going to read as I read this paragraph. So I'd be tracking on the text and thinking while I read. In 1964, Hammer attended the Democratic National Convention and spoke without notes for 13 minutes. That's a long time to speak without notes. Yes, I can go back to number 4. Sorry. Thanks for telling me to slow down. Please continue to do that. So here's how we check for understanding. I'll read it one more time. We read a little, we stop reading, we ask ourselves, what was that part about? And then we tell ourselves in our own words what that part was about. And a really good way to do that is to cover the text so that you're not rereading it, and see if you can remember what you just read about. All right. In 1964, and this is again still the same article that we've been reading the whole time, Hammer attended the Democratic National Convention and spoke without notes for 13 minutes. So without reading anything, she spoke for 13 minutes. That's a really long time to go. Read a speech without notes. Not read a speech, just say a speech without notes. Hammer spoke about injustices suffered by Black people and her experiences with police stopping her from registering to vote. So things that have been unfair to Black people, unjust, and her experiences with police that have been stopping her from registering to vote. All of this is on account of we want to register to become first-class citizens, Hammer said. Is this America, the land of the free and the home of the brave, where our lives be threatened daily because we want to live as decent human beings? And here where she's quoting the land of the free and home of the brave, she's quoting the national anthem, right? I think that's what that song is called. And she's saying that's what we call this country, but our lives are threatened daily as Black people. So now I would cover what I just read and I'd be like, okay, I just read a paragraph. What did I just read about? So I'm going to stop and I'll go back to the list. I read a little, now I'm stopping, I'm on number 2, and I'm asking myself, what was that part about? And I'll say in my own words what it was about. And it's about Hammer going to the convention and speaking without anything written down. And she's talking about her experiences as a Black woman with police and not being able to register to vote. And she wants to be treated like a human being. So I just, without reading it, without having it in front of me, I know that I was thinking while I was reading because I'm able to now repeat back what I was just reading. All right. So if I did not understand what I just read, I would give myself I'd write a little X and I'd be like, okay, like what didn't I understand? Were there words I didn't understand? You know, if I don't understand, if I can't repeat it back, I shouldn't move on. I should stop right there and I should do what I need to do to figure out what I'm reading, to check for understanding. Use my tracks, use my connections, use everything. If I did understand it, then I can move on. Okay, I got this paragraph. I was able to repeat back and say, you know, Hammer went to the convention. She spoke about police brutality and about not being able to register to vote, and she wants to be treated like a decent human being. All right, did I understand it? Yes. Can I move on? Yes, that's a CFU. That's a check for understanding. And I'll write in the chat, CFU equals check for understanding. And I did that by using those 4 steps that were on the last slide. All right, why should you always CFU? So why should you check for understanding? And we talked about different professions or jobs, why you need to check for understanding, but as a reader, why do you need to check for understanding? I'm gonna ask that you drop in the chat or come off mute. Why do you think you need to check for understanding? Do real readers check for understanding? Can I get a nod or a yes or a thumbs up if you think real readers check for understanding? All right, Selena's giving me a thumbs up. Christopher's giving me a yes, right? If we're really reading, we're making sure we understand what we're reading. Awesome. Why? CMRS saying yes. Yep. Always check. Why do we have to check? Right, so we can take in all the info, so we can understand and make sure we're taking it in and really reading. And if we don't check for understanding and we get to the end of the story and you hear, what did you just read? You might not be able to answer that question because you might have missed words or sentences or paragraphs because you were just reading what was on the page and you weren't making sure you understood what you read before you moved on. All right, so one more trick, and this is a lot of text, but it's in little chunks because this is a bite-sized trick. So sometimes when I'm reading, I get to the end of an article or a book and I don't remember what I read. And I keep talking about this, right? Like we'll get to the end of a book and my friends will be like, oh, what was that about? And I'm like, honestly, I didn't even process it. I don't know. Or I can say a little bit, but like I didn't really understand. To help me avoid this or to not do this, I can check for understanding along the way. I can break my reading into bite-sized chunks, little chunks. At the end of each part, I can stop and think about what I just read. If I'm reading a passage, I might draw lines at the end of each paragraph. Each line is like a stop sign in my mind. In a picture book, I might stop at the end of each page, so I can imagine a stop sign in my mind. These bite-sized chunks help me break the reading into smaller parts. Instead of waiting until the end to try to understand what I'm reading, I can check more often. So what I mean by that is like every sentence or every paragraph, it's like you can draw a little line or a little stop sign or something to remind yourself, okay, I got to stop here and think, what did I just read? What did I just read? So we're not waiting until we get to the end of a chapter, until we get to the end of the book. We're taking off little bite-sized chunks, like a fun-sized snack, so we can make sure we're checking every so often to make sure we understand what we read. All right, so real reading. What's real reading? Drop it in the chat, come off mute. What have we talked about so far? What is real reading? Thinking while you read. Leaving tracks. CFU, checking for understanding. Exactly. So it is all of these things and more. Thinking. Yep. Selena, Ciamaro, thank you for writing in the chat. Thinking while you read. Leaving tracks. Checking for understanding. Bite-sized reading. Right. Little chunks. Breaking it down. All right. So now I know this was supposed to go till 7. That was all I had for tonight. I'm going to say, are there any books, any stories, any articles? I'll ask, and you can come off mute or write in the chat that you have read. That's your favorite. And would you think about rereading them to see if you would understand it better if you use these tricks? So I have read Harry Potter like 10 times. And every time I learn something new, or I feel like I understand it a little bit better. So anything you all have read that you might want to reread. And I'm actually going to drop the link to the article we were reading tonight in the chat and see. Actually, let's see if I can do that so that you all can keep reading it if you want to, or practice your real reading on the rest of it. So while I do that, share ways that you real read, and let me know if you can open this. And I'm here for a few more minutes. We can wrap up. You can hop off if you're good, or we can talk a little bit more about real reading. I can answer questions or we can practice. You let me know what works for you all. This class was for students. It could be helpful for parents. I'm going to do this every month, and if parents want to come, I'm just answering a question in the chat and learn some of these tips and tricks, they can definitely do that. And like I said, we recorded tonight, so hopefully people that weren't here can read it. But I know some of the ones on the website are specific for parents, and some are specific for students. Thank you. Thanks for being here. Your favorite book is Dog Man, Selena. Is that something you'll go back and maybe read again and leave tracks or think while you read? I'm going to actually stop the recording since I think we are good.